All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Emily Young with the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech. This is our final quarterly government vendor network session of 2020. Thanks for tuning into this virtual format. We're recording today's session and we'll be making it available to all who registered for today's event. For those who are new, these sessions are an opportunity for us to invite public sector leaders to come share their activities and priorities with their current and potential business partners. As most of you know, we're fortunate to have had the expertise of the Brooks Pierce law firm for many years as our legislative counsel, led by Ed Turlington, along with his colleague, Matt Bales. After our guest speaker segment, they'll offer a brief legislative overview to close out our session. Just a few quick announcements. As you can imagine, we've converted a number of existing programming to virtual sessions and are adding content, new content as well. In recent months, we hosted our inaugural Diversity and Inclusion in Tech Summit, our annual State of Technology Conference, and most recently, our first ever Summit for Women in Tech. All of these were virtual, and we had tremendous response in attendance and sponsorship, which I'm sure many of you participated in. Our last major event of the year is usually the NC Tech Awards Gala, held in the Raleigh Convention Center, but obviously that has been converted to virtual as well. Instead of an evening program lasting a few hours, we'll instead broadcast our awards show as 3 shorter segments on successive afternoons at 4 p.m. on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. You'll be able to sit back with a beverage and watch on your smart TV like it's a typical awards show. It's free to attend, but you'll need to register in advance. We also are finalizing the sponsor lineup, so if your organization would like to present one of the awards or be visible in some other way, check out the sponsorship menu. All of this information is available at nctech.org/awards. You can also view the finalists for each of the corporate awards, which have just recently been announced. A quick word of instruction for today's session, since we're not together in person. Please begin submitting brief questions for our guest speaker by using the Q&A feature while they're speaking, and then we'll try to work them in as time permits. If you have technical difficulties, you can use the chat feature and our team will respond to those. But again, for questions, you can use the Q&A function. With that, let me thank the sponsor of today's session, SAS, a longtime and very supportive member of NC Tech. Please welcome Eric Hunley, who'll say a few words of greeting and then introduce our guest speaker. Eric?
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. SAS is pleased to be a sponsor of today's session of the NC Tech Government Vendor Network. Here at SAS, and especially our U.S. government team, we are motivated to drive better decisions in digital transformation of government and better outcomes for our citizens through the use of data and analytics. As a longtime member of NC Tech and a participant in the vendor network, it's our pleasure to be your sponsor this afternoon. Today, we are honored to have with us Maria Thompson, State Chief Risk Officer. With the sudden switch early this year to remote working, security has even more prominent place on all organizations' priority lists, particularly governments, which have so much personal data. Maria joined the NC Department of IT in 2015 as the state's first Chief Risk Officer. She was responsible for developing an integrated statewide framework to manage information risk, including operations, security, and data protection. She began her career with 20 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps, retiring as a cybersecurity chief for the Marines. She held private sector roles after that before coming to state government. The state's Department of IT is a longtime member of NC Tech and a partner together in many ways. I'm very pleased to introduce and welcome our fellow member, Maria Thompson. Maria?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all. Thanks to NC Tech for the opportunity to present today. Before I go any further, I'd like to wish everyone Happy Cyber Awareness Month. If you're not familiar with that, October is National Cyber Awareness Month, and I think it's just fitting that I'm here today doing this brief presentation. So I'm going to be covering a few things on where we are currently within the state and where we look to go in the future. And please feel free to be open with your questions and I'll try to answer them as much as possible. Next slide, please. So again, a few things that I'm going to be covering is just a quick overview of our security program. how we handle vendor risk, which, vendor risk is an increasing problem that we're dealing with, not just within North Carolina, but of course, countrywide. Also, some of our current security challenges and our strategic plan, which, by the way, is out on our website. And then, of course, a Q&A session if you have any questions after that. I just want to say, if I'm speaking a little bit too fast and you need me to slow down, please don't feel away. Let me know. I do tend to speed up sometimes when I'm going through these presentations. So the security program, for those who are not aware of my team or my office, it's the Enterprise Security Risk Management Office, and it sits within the Department of Information Technology. And what our role, our main role, our mission statement, if you will, for the state is to establish and maintain that governance over the security program for state agencies. But in the last couple of years, we've kind of broadened or spread our wings a little bit more because of the obviously pressing need with the security and how interconnected we are within state government. And I'll touch on that a little bit later on. But as you can see by the slides, some of the things, the general principles and mission activities that we do within our Enterprise Security Risk Management Office are standard to any security program. So when you think about statewide security policies, when you think about project reviews, making sure that solutions that are being deployed or that are being purchased have security in mind, that we have security baked in. When you think about application development, cyber awareness, obviously, which is very key. So we have a very robust cyber awareness program that's mandatory for state employees. We run phishing exercises all the time, even during this pandemic situation that we're dealing with right now, to make sure that cybersecurity is on the forefront of everyone's minds. Vulnerability management, we do forensics out of our team, and we have a state security operations center that is 24/7, 365. In a few years back, we decided, in 2018, in fact, we decided to adopt the NIST 853 Rev 4 at the time, soon to be Rev 5, and our policies and the way that we approach security and our security controls are based on those particular security controls associated with the NIST framework. We have a continuous monitoring plan and what that means, and I'll go into a little bit more details a little bit further. It's making sure that whatever we do, whenever we're assessing our security controls, it's done in a manner that is continuous. So it's not just the one and done that we do on an annual basis, but that we're assessing the effectiveness of our security controls that are in place for the various data types that we have to protect, and making sure that they are effectively working. Next slide, please. So I alluded to this earlier about us spreading our wings. As part of the security program, we've also expanded outside of state agencies, and we've adopted what's called a whole of state approach to cyber. As you know, or you may be familiar, the way that the authorities are written, the state CIO doesn't have authority over local government. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now with local government is through relationship building. So we're definitely building those relationships, providing assistance whenever there is ransomware or any type of cyber incidents that are occurring, looking at how we can ensure that our contracts are more open and convenience contracts that allow for greater adoption by local government and academic institutions within North Carolina. We're doing things such as monitoring. We're using a security scoring mechanism to give us a little bit of insight into the external security presence or posture of our local governments and our schools. So now we're able to look and see exactly who has the greatest need. And it helps us to identify where those pockets are that we need to maybe focus more. And when we go in and ask for budgets, what we should be asking for to help to increase their security posture from a statewide perspective, not just state agencies. I think that the days of us focusing just on state agencies are long gone. We need to really start looking at how we are interconnected, how we can help each other, because for those who operate in the security world, we are all aware that we're all under-resourced. So we have to pool our resources. We have to pool our knowledge bases and make sure that we can mutually support each other when those times of need occur. We've developed a statewide significant cyber incident plan, and that is part of the emergency operations plan. And what that basically allows us to do is to look across all the resources across the state, whether it is within the local government. We've partnered well with the Nickel-G's IT strike teams, great bunch of individuals, skilled, knowledgeable, and very supportive of what we're trying to do within the, from a statewide perspective. So we've partnered with them. We've leveraged the emergency management hierarchy, if you will. So when we need resources, there's the local emergency managers within the local government. So we can tap into those resources to help from a logistical perspective. And we also partner with our vendor partners on, providing solutions. If there is something that is outside of our ability to bring to bear, whether it's from a forensics perspective or a recovery perspective, we definitely leverage, all of you that are out there for those particular services that you provide. Something that I'm always stressing with our vendor partners is the statewide information sharing changes that were made under House Bill 217. I keep stressing this. And what that does is that basically changed the language of how we report cyber incidents. So it requires local governments now to report cyber incidents to the state. And it's not just so that we can have visibility on what is happening, but it's also how we can help figure out how and what resources that are needed within these impacted entities so that we can support them. But another thing that House Bill 217 states, though, it recommends that our private sector partners share information with us. And by that, I mean, it can be anonymized, it's intel sharing. It's really, if you're seeing a threat within your environment, chances are there's an opportunity that could impact us as well, or vice versa. So we should be open to share those types of threats that you're seeing within your environment, those indicators of compromise, so that we can better protect ourselves over the long run. And then most recently in August, we partnered with the 211 and the Cybercrime Network to establish a cybercrime hotline. And I keep pushing this because I think it's so great, because you've heard me, if you've ever heard me speak, you've heard me talk about the what we're doing from a state perspective, what we're doing from a local government perspective, but this goes to the heart of the matter. This is private, I'm sorry, this is the citizens of North Carolina. These are the residents of North Carolina. How can we get them help? So now the citizens can now pick up 211 or pick up their phone and dial 211 and get a hold of somebody that can help them, guide them through, whatever cybercrime activities that they're currently impacted by. If they need to speak to the FBI, or if they need to fill out a certain report, or if they need to contact their bank, there are trained individuals now that can support them through that effort. And it's not just a one and done. These trained individuals will also contact the residents again after the fact and do a follow-up call with them to see, is there anything else that they need? Did the help that they received, was it beneficial to them? And, if there's something else that they can do to support them. So I think this is so great when we think, again, from a whole of state approach of cybersecurity. You have state, local, academic institutions, but now you have a citizen-facing support mechanism for them. Next slide, please. Vendor risk management. I touched on this a little bit earlier. As you're all aware, we are getting impacted on a daily basis with all the different ransomware attacks that have increased exponentially in the last couple of years. There's never a day that I'm not reading a blog article or anything along those lines that there's not a large entity, in fact, that's being impacted by a ransomware incident of some sort. And so we have to take an approach of making sure that the vendors that we do work with, that they have at least they have a solid foundation on a security program, that they're doing the right things to protect the data, the state's data that may be resident within their hosting facilities. And for those who are not aware, NCGS 143B 1376 is the statute that we apply these requirements based on. Basically, it says that the state CIO is responsible for any state data that sits within the a state agency or within local county or private sector entities. So we have established a program where we assess our vendors that we're doing business with to make sure that they are meeting those requirements before we go into contract with them. Because again, we don't want it after the fact. And then we end up having a situation where, we have data exfiltrated on data that is out on the dark web for sale, so on and so forth. So this slide speaks to some of the requirements that we have. We have a vendor risk assessment report. And what this vendor risk assessment report does is it's a subset of the statewide security policies. One of the criticisms that we've had over time from our vendor partners would be, why is it that, when I'm signing a contract, it says that I will be compliant with the statewide information security manual? There's so many requirements there. What is it that I'm supposed to be responsible for? And that's what this report is focused on. It's identifying those key requirements that for SaaS providers that they need to meet, that we require our SaaS providers to meet outside of the entire statewide security manual. So hopefully you find that of value. We also look at third-party attestations as part of that vetting process, making sure that if an entity is going to host our restricted or highly restricted data, social security numbers, PCI, IRS type data, that they have a rigorous continuous monitoring plan, that they're being assessed by a third party, they're getting penetration tests done, they have, they have an attestation from either whether it's a SOC 2 type 2, high trust, ISO, FedRAMP, and then we require these to be maintained throughout the life of the contract. So every year we require the vendor partners to provide this information to us so that then we can, on October 1st of every year, report back to our legislators to say, yes, we have assessed the security of our vendor partners and the state data that is resident within their environment, and it meets our requirements. And the last bullet there, I put it there only because, in dealing with our legal folks, when we're reviewing contracts and we're going back and forth with some of our vendor partners, one of the things that I find really surprising is that a lot of our vendors have a problem with that last bullet, which is requiring that we report cyber incidents within 24 hours of confirmation of the incident. So we're not saying as soon as you suspect something has happened that we want you to report. It's once you've confirmed that it is in fact an incident. So there's those nuances, but for some reason we lose a lot of daylight hours negotiating that one bullet there. So I just wanted to bring that in and hopefully stress and explain how we look at that from a state perspective, and not necessarily as soon as something happens, we expect you to, because we understand that there's forensics that need to occur in order to confirm certain things. And of course, the overall impact of that incident needs to be determined. Next slide, please. So this slide I actually stole from a recent NASCIO report that's done. It's an annual cybersecurity report that NASCIO does with the help of one of their partners, Deloitte. And I only bring this up because, as was mentioned earlier, with this pandemic, we had to really speed up our processes on multiple fronts. We had to speed up the way that we did procurement to make sure that those agencies that needed to support COVID-related activities, that they were able to get the service that they needed from you all. But from an infrastructure perspective, we had to make sure that the infrastructure was sound and resilient. We had to make sure that our teleconferencing solutions met our requirements, because as you know, when everyone was told you need to go home and take your laptop and go home, it became somewhat of a wild, wild west situation. So we had to keep, again, security on the forefront of all of our end users' minds as they operated in their home environments, that these are the things that you need to do on a regular basis. You need to still maintain the security of your home networks, as well as your devices that are connected to the home networks. These are the things that you need to be looking at from a ransomware perspective, be careful of. And also, those other things like, for example, all the things that we've learned to date from a continuity of operations, making sure that we follow up with our agencies to continue to build those lessons learned into their continuity of operations so it doesn't become stale data that no one remembers, because unfortunately situations like this could potentially occur again, and we want to be prepared for the inevitability of that. Next slide, please. So security challenges, I've been touching on ransomware, and for those who haven't seen this slide before, for 2019, we really started seeing that uptick in attacks against state and local government. And these numbers were reported to us, just what were reported to us. Do I believe these numbers are all the incidents that have occurred across the state? No, I don't believe that. But this is what, again, was reported to us. We had 3 counties impacted: a city, community colleges, K through 12s. We had one vendor partner that impacted all 21 ABC board locations across the state. The numbers just keep coming and coming and coming at us, and ransomware just keeps being that one key thing that is impacting all of us. The types of variants that we've seen, mainly Ryuk, Doppelpaymer, Sadenokibi, those were the 3 ones that were part of all these activities that we had to help with. And we, through our partnership with the National Guard Cyber Response Force, were able to launch a support element out to them, boots on the ground, along with our Nickel Giza IT strike team, to help majority of these impacted entities through their recovery and their forensics processes. So the little capture there that I have on that slide is from one of our vendor partners. I took that out of one of their reports, and it lists the type of ransomware that is impacting certain parts of the government. And as you can see, it matches completely to what we're seeing within the state. So if they needed validation, I can definitely give that to them. Next slide, please. 2020 it really started off with a bang. We were hoping that the numbers would decrease, but in fact, they have increased. We had 3 counties, 3 cities, 4 K through 12, 3 higher education elements that have been impacted by ransomware. And, again, the variants now have increased. So as you can see, we still have Ryuk, Doppelpaymer, Sadenokibi, but we've also got Conti, Matrix, Lockbit, Phobos, Suncrypt, all of these other elements that are coming at us. And this is where, when I look to our vendor partners, I would ask that as you approach the state to provide support, think about, from a holistic perspective, what capabilities you can bring to bear, and not necessarily the one-off things. A lot of times the local governments, they are struggling. We have the National Guard doing assessments on the local county infrastructures right now, and there's definitely a trend. They are under-resourced. From a funding perspective, from personnel and subject matter expertise perspective. So they really need something that will help them, not another tool that's going to beacon out to them, because they're under-resourced. So whatever those solutions are, it really needs to be a holistic solution that will take the load, the heavy lifting off of their hands, to help them to maintain an awareness and security of their environments overall. Next slide, please. So just going into our strategic plan, which, by the way, is on our website. It's under the IT strategic plan, but from a cybersecurity perspective, some of the things that we've been looking at that was on my list, my to-do list, if you will, for this year on out. Obviously, to integrate the security tools that we have across the enterprise. We have, in the past couple of years, invested heavily in filling, and bridging those gaps that we found within our security toolkit. But now we really need to focus on how do we integrate these solutions so that it does take the heavy lifting off of the teams, because even at the state, we are under-resourced as well in some of the agencies. So the more we can lessen the footprint of the tools that are out there, the better it is for us to reduce our need for pivoting across the various things. And as you know, some of the state agencies have not completely been optimized or consolidated under DIT. So the infrastructure is not necessarily supportive of some of being able to have visibility into what the security postures of various elements are. So we are looking to, as we look at solutions that we're deploying across the enterprise, truly across the enterprise, to give us to be an overlay, if you will, on top of the IT infrastructure, to give us that visibility into what are the endpoints doing, what are their security posture, what do we need to be focusing on, to help us build that picture so that when we go to our legislators and ask for budget support, that we are making a understanding that the budgets are going to be impacted, especially by COVID, that our asks make sense, that we're being fiscally responsible across the board. And my overall goal, obviously, is to increase the maturity, but not just from a, again, state agency, for the state as a whole. Automation and orchestration, going back to what I talked about integrating the tools, huge for us, huge for us. So SOAR technologies has been something that was actually on my list before pre-COVID, and it still is today. So we, again, I think that that's where we're going to really move the needle, is if we can automate as much as possible and take the low-hanging fruits away from, from the time, take it away from our resources that are constantly in the weeds all the time, trying to work through those small incidents, so that they can really focus on what the critical things that are going on the network, and be effective and reduce that mean time to detect and to recover. Next slide, please. Again, stolen from our NASCIO partners there. And I wanted to showcase this slide only because, as I talk about the whole of state approach, it's not just North Carolina. There are numerous states, and this wave is picking up, that the states are starting to realize, the state IT folks are starting to realize that they can no longer take that myopic view of state government as the only thing that, if that gets impacted, that's going to impact, the citizens. Our data sits, whether it's health data, it sits within the local counties. Our critical infrastructure, our 911 systems, our, all the first responder systems, water, all of those critical infrastructure sit within local government. And so if we are not taking that approach, we're really setting ourselves up for failure, which is one of the reasons why you see a greater adoption of a whole of state approach, or whole of government approach across multiple states. And again, that's going to continue. Next slide, please. And this is just another slide to talk about, again, this, by the way, I just want to caveat that this report was all CISOs, 50 states and 1 territory. We all responded to this. So the information that you're seeing here is not just North Carolina or just a subset of the states. These are all the states. And so they were able to wrap this around. And this is a really good report because it really gives you an idea of what is happening countrywide. But with the pandemic, what we've seen is an increase in fraud, UI fraud. So while it's not written on my strategic plan right now, it definitely is a concern, because from a state perspective, we need to get a better handle on UI fraud that's it's happening everywhere, not just the employment security fraud that we've seen as an increase as part of COVID, but they're finding, the bad guys are definitely pivoting and finding ways to get into their systems and to commit fraud activities. So this is something that we will be adding to our strategic plan from a cyber perspective. Next slide. And of course, it goes without saying, I wanted to showcase this. If you notice the second bullet there under identity and access management, and how fast it's jumped to the top. And what that means is the states are starting to realize that identity is where it's at, if you will, and that we have to get a better handle on identity management. And, for those who are familiar with North Carolina, we have our NCID infrastructure. It is definitely going through its changes. We hope to have the next gen NCID project out soon because it is needed. And it's time that we do refresh that environment, and that it makes sense, and that we have a strong citizen facing solution that offers various ways for managing identity, whether it's through biometrics and those other capabilities, and not the legacy infrastructure that we currently operate with. Next slide. And Brooks, I'm not sure, am I out of time or am I going too fast? Okay, good. Well, now it's the Q&A session. So hopefully I didn't speed through those slides too fast. And if you have any questions for me, I am open to respond.
Great. Well, thanks, Maria, and thanks to Emily for pitching in at the beginning as I was juggling some things simultaneously today, and to Eric and Sass for supporting the session today. I think you caught a lot of people's attention on this call when you said you were helping the ABC stores. We appreciate that. I want to make sure they remain fully functional. Yes. And I also want to point out before we go into Q&A, I had the opportunity again this year with one of our strong media partners, Business North Carolina Magazine, to moderate their annual security and privacy roundtable, which Maria participated in and shared some of this information. And there will be a special section, I think it's probably 4 or 5 pages long, done as though it's a transcribed sort of interview discussion in the November edition of Business North Carolina Magazine. So I would encourage everybody to keep an eye out for that. And you'll see some of the issues that were broached today expanded on a bit there. So thanks very much, Maria, for being part of that as well. We do have one question. It was actually put in the chat section. I want to encourage everyone, if you have a question you'd like me to pose to Maria, please use the Q&A section. That's what I'm following for questions. And we have one, but before I get there, you want to touch on something you mentioned several times, NASIO, which is the national group of your peers. And that raises the question, were a lot of the examples that you gave today about new policies and requirements and vendor requirements and so on, are those ones that were developed pretty unique to North Carolina? Or are they mostly standardized now and more so across the state as you coordinate with your peers? Tell us a bit about where those come from, how they're developed.
Oh, thank you, Brooks. And actually, that's a very good question. So I will say this, that a lot of what we look to do is to not recreate the wheel. And so we looked at the fact that, one, we have federal data that we are responsible for within the state of North Carolina, within our agencies. And we wanted to normalize the processes as much as possible. So we looked at what the federal models were, what their requirements were, because we know that if we meet the federal requirements, there's a good chance that it's going, we will cover our bases from a state perspective. So we look to mirror and utilize those processes used by FedRAMP and those organizations to do an assessment of the vendors that are being used for certain services. Is it something that is widely used across other states? We've definitely had those conversations. I don't think it's standardized as yet, though that's a work in progress. What we've talked about most recently is not FedRAMP, but I think it's called, is it State Ramp? Something similar where we've actually just started. We're in the beginning phases of discussing how we could create something similar that would be across all the states. Obviously, with a situation like that, it requires trust between the different states. But we've talked about establishing a working group. And when I say we, the CISO peers across all the states, talked about creating a working group to establish what that framework would look like, and that what the adoption model would look like, so that we could all agree that this makes sense, so that, a vendor that approaches North Carolina doesn't have to worry about doing something completely different when they go to South Carolina or Virginia and so on and so forth. So we get that. We get that the impact is great. And we are looking to leverage things that are being used elsewhere.
Thank you. The question that was submitted by chat, I'll read it as it was posed. Does the state have a dashboard or a consolidation mechanism in place to bring all of the data that you collect into one place or interface?
So when you say data, I just want to clarify what that means. Do you mean security data or data in general?
I think that I'm assuming the questioner means data in general.
We have what's called our Government Data Analytics Center, GDAC.
Right.
And that is meant to be our warehouse, our data warehouse for the state of North Carolina. And for those who don't know, John Corellis, he's the director over that team. He and I have had a lot of conversations about how we can leverage that data more, so that we're not, when I think about security and privacy of data. I think that we have way too many systems out there that have social security numbers in it. Too many organizations using it as a key, if you will, in their database. Whereas, an organization such as GDAC could be able to support what those needs are. So figuring out what that balance is so we can implement data minimization as much as possible, and utilizing, if there needs to be some kind of data correlation, tapping into GDAC to provide those services versus going off and building their own and then increasing their risk posture, if you will.
Thank
Hopefully
you.
that answers your question. Or the person who asked.
That's right. One more question I had for you, and I think I posed this to you in our Business North Carolina Roundtable discussion. I'm not sure if they will include it in their publication, but with the suddenness of the impact of COVID, a lot of things had to go virtual that weren't really planned to go virtual that quickly all at once. When the state when the state offers services to its citizens, whether it's how a small business can file their paperwork, or how a citizen can renew a license, or what have you, whether it's hunting or drivers or whatever they may need, has all of this accelerated the state's effort to move to virtual approvals, submittals, et cetera, in ways that we're still not there yet?
And actually, and that's another good question, because we have recently stood up a working group just for that within DIT. And when I say DIT, meaning the greater DIT with our optimized agencies as well, having stakeholders that are part of this discussion, because we understand that there is a need, because we know that we are not going to be, more likely not going to be going back to where it was before. And so we anticipate that there's going to be this need for services that will support the end users no matter where they are. And we need to figure out what those solutions are, how we can deliver those solutions. And let's be honest, if DIT is not the one that can provide those, maybe look at leveraging our vendor partners to partner and provide those services to, through DIT to those entities. So this working group meets on a regular basis, and it's a task force, if you will, to identify what those things are, what those IT requirements are, how we can leverage digital signatures and printing, and all these different things that when we're in our office, we take for granted. But then when we have end users at their home, it's a completely different ball of wax. And we want to, from my perspective, reduce the shadow IT activities that could be occurring and outside of our purview. So that is definitely near and dear to us. It is on our plan, and we're definitely approaching it and hopefully figuring out what our transformation, what our digital transformation is for the future of DIT in this new environment.
Sure. Well, thank you. We've moved through our question time. If you can stay with us a few minutes, we are going to switch now to Ed Turlington and Matt Bales from the Brooks Pierce firm for a legislative update that we'll momentarily share with you on the screen while they speak. And again, if you have questions about this, please submit using the same Q&A function I referred to a little earlier. And with that, Ed, if you want to take it away, I'll turn it over to you.
Good. Thank you. This is Ed Turlington with Brooks Pierce. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Matt Bales, and also to have our government affairs colleague, Katie Kingsbury, on the call with us. Among other clients, Katie represents IT companies. Our purpose today is to give you a snapshot of some government affairs matters that we hope will be relevant to you. We've created a document which I believe NC Tech will share and perhaps be a resource material. Maria, let me reiterate to you on behalf of all of us at NC Tech, we appreciate the important work you do for state government. So what I'm going to do, Brooks, is move through our 3 Roman numerals and ask Matt for his expert commentary. Page 1 is simply on one page, the key elections in North Carolina this year. The presidential race kind of speaks for itself, so we didn't put that on here. Most of you probably know North Carolina is a state that elects a lot of people on a statewide basis. We have 10 statewide elected officials. We listed the 7 incumbents that are running for re-election. And then there are 3 open seats where we will have new people in those offices. You probably also know that the entire General Assembly is elected every 2 years. At this point, Republicans have majorities in both houses. And one of the things to watch this year is to see what are the results after November 3rd related to that. We have some important federal races. We have a Senate seat with Senator Tillis running for re-election, 13 U.S. House seats. Due to a redrawing of lines, there may be some Democratic gains there. We shall see. And then, as you probably know, all our appellate courts are on the ballot. There's 7 seats on the Supreme Court. 3 are up for election this year. Court of Appeals, there are 15 seats. 5 are up for election. So let me stop there. And Matt, we welcome your comments in these election matters.
So the most important thing to remember about the elections, especially the 170 General Assembly seats, as you know, we're going into the 10th year of the biennium. So we will be going and as you know, the Make It Count NC has been doing the census. So after this election, the party who controls the chamber of the House and the Senate and the General Assembly will be responsible for drawing the maps that the state will operate under for the next 10 years. And so that's why a lot of focus has been paid to the General Assembly level to have power of the pen. As you all have seen on your TV, I mean, we are experiencing, I think we're going to be close to $500 million in TV ads. That's not including all the money being spent on digital ads. And I'm sure everybody's still getting their text messages and mail. So, you know, North Carolina's status as a battleground state is very prevalent this time. I think there was some analysis this morning. We are the only U.S. Senate race that is still or a toss-up race. And so we'll continue to be a competitive race for the next 13 days. You know, we see dignitaries from both campaigns stopping in North Carolina every few days. So it will be a long race until Election Day. So just brace yourselves. But the most important takeaway is the control of the General Assembly gets to control the pen and drawing the next set of redistricting maps in 2021.
Matt, could I ask you a follow-up question on that last point? Point 1, I think I'm correct that the maps are something that the governor, no matter who that is, cannot veto. And then second of all, you painted the scenario which we have had for this decade where the Republicans control both houses, and so they could draw the maps as they saw fit. Let's say, and I know this is a hypothetical, let's say the R's control one chamber, the D's control another. Just in part for fun, spin out that scenario, although it's a hypothetical.
You're right. The governor has no ability to control any aspect of the process. He can veto a map. It is strictly legislative. And so under your hypothetical scenario, you know, it would just go back and forth until they agreed to a compromise map. You know, the last set of maps, you know, they ran a bunch of computer generated scenarios to produce a map in which they used as the baseline. So it'll be, you know, interesting to see. You know, Democrats have campaigned pretty heavily on creating an independent redistricting apparatus. You know, the devil's always in the details of what that apparatus looks like, whether it's an independent commission, you know, whether it's a bunch of outsiders drawing the maps. And so, you know, in that hypothetical situation, you know, the two chambers would just go back and forth until they reached agreement.
Right. Thank you. And one other thing, and you may have touched on this, as I understand it, we're not only talking about the maps for 170 legislative seats, we're talking about the maps for the U.S. House districts and the potential that due to the Senate, North Carolina could gain a seat. Any comment?
No, that's correct. I mean, early on, we were projected to gain at least one congressional seat. And so the new districts would be drawn by the General Assembly for the U.S. congressional districts. Again, all maps, once they're passed, they have to go through an approval process with the DOJ. And, you know, they've, just like the maps for the last 10 years, they can always be subject to a lot of litigation. I don't see that trend stopping. And so, just because one set of maps are passed doesn't mean we're going to constantly be in them for the next 10 years.
Okay, thank you. Emily, if you're controlling the screen, if you could move to the second page. We have two other Roman numerals to provide information. I'm sure you've been following the various executive orders issued by the governor related to the virus. As you know, the most recent one moved the state to phase 3, which goes through October 23rd, which I think is this Saturday. I think many people are anticipating the governor will at least speak to this matter this week, whether he extends this phase 3 or does something else. I certainly don't know. We did put the link there if you want to look at that for yourself. And then our final item, we simply wanted to put in one page under Roman numeral 3, the various bills you could look at related to action taken by the General Assembly this year to appropriate federal COVID money that came to the state. You will note on the handout, on the fourth bullet down, there's something called COVID-19 info. That is a helpful link on the General Assembly's website that has a variety of information. The General Assembly has adjourned for the year, but we're watching, and Matt informed me just prior to the call on whether or not Congress is going to appropriate additional money that the General Assembly may have to parcel out. So Matt, what would you say about these two Roman numerals?
I mean, I think the big question now, I mean, all the current CARES Act money has been distributed through the 3 sessions that convened. The big question now is, does Congress get a deal done? I think Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi are hashing out a deal. Republican leader Senator McConnell has said he will bring whatever the House passes to the floor for their consideration. So hypothetically, if it's done before the beginning of the year, the North Carolina General Assembly could come back into a short lame duck session and pass and appropriate funds, or depending on what the federal legislation looks like, they could wait till next year if there's not an urgent deadline.
Okay, thank you. So Brooks, those are our comments. We welcome questions, or if we want to do them offline, I put my contact information at the bottom.
Great. Thank you both for that. And again, we will be coming out with an email to everyone following this session with a recording of this session, so you'll have access to the items that were distributed. I noticed that Maria has been dutifully answering questions in the Q&A section. So if you have posed a question there, take a look and see what the answers might be. And Maria, if you're still with us, can you come back on screen if you're able to? I might pose one that I think has maybe not been answered as yet. There you are. Thank you for answering the ones there. Everyone can see them. One of the ones here is, will the state's cost of combating COVID, or I guess in general, the budget impact of COVID, dilute the budget funds available for security and risk needs? I know that you didn't cover a lot of stuff in your presentation that was directly about appropriations or the expenditure of funds, but maybe you could touch on that briefly.
Thanks, Brooke. And, I will say this. That's one of my, it's a tough decision and a discussion to have, because we've already seen where there are impacts that we're going to be feeling. And I think that it may reduce our ability to move forward with any net new projects. So right now we're really, I'm optimistic that it will pan out and that we will be able to get the recurring budget that we need for the current projects that we have and not have to choose one over the other. But I am concerned, and I think this is a concern that even my peers across the states have, because we're seeing that. And local government, my peers in the local government, they're all saying the same thing. So we're really focused on maintaining the status quo, optimizing the status quo as much as possible. And hopefully we are able to leverage other funding mechanisms. We were successful, and I apologize if you can hear the lawnmower from my neighbors, but we were successful in obtaining some CARES Act funding. And of course, that comes with a lot of restrictions. but we were able to get CARES Act funding to move forward with some net new, but projects. But that's where we are right now. So long story short, we hope that it won't be too impactful to us, but we do have to take that into consideration, and that's something that we are discussing right now on how we're going to work through the next session.
Great, thank you for jumping back in. I want to thank everybody, and Maria, of course, and your team, Ed and Matt and your firm, our friends at SAS and Eric, who was on earlier, for sponsoring today. We'll have 4 of these quarterly sessions again in 2021. We typically sell out of those sponsorships in advance, so I would invite any of you whose company wishes to claim one or more of the 2021 spots to email me directly. I'll be following up, as I mentioned earlier, with an email to everyone who was registered for today with a recording of this session and links to some of the items that we've mentioned. So with that, have a great rest of your day.